Hello and welcome back to Planet 40k. This is the second part in our series where we're going to be doing tier lists for each and every battlefield role in the Necron Codex, just to give you my sort of standpoint where every unit currently is competitively in the 40k game. So today we're going to be looking at the elite section of the Codex, and I believe there are 15 options that we're going to split into tier groups. So as always guys, before getting into today's video, make sure you subscribe to the channel to not miss out on any future content. So now let's begin with the tier list. So as in the previous video, we're going to be starting from the worst tier, which is going to be the D tier, moving upwards to the C tier, the B tier, the A tier, and then the best tier, which is the S tier, otherwise known as the God tier. So let's begin with units within the D tier, and we're going to be going with the Canoptic Tombstalker. So we're going to start off with some good points about the unit, go on to some negative points, and then explain why the unit's in the actual tier group it's in. So starting off with the good points, it's got a 10-inch movement, it's got 9 wounds, it's got the dimensional translocation ability, so it is able to deep strike if you want it to. It's then got the Gloom Prism, so potentially you can deny the Witch, as if it was a Psyker model. And finally, it's got both ranged and melee attacks. Now, both the melee and ranged attacks aren't the greatest on this unit, hence why it's in the D tier. Strength 5, Rapid Fire 2 with the Gore Slicers, only -1 AP and 1 damage, going up against Armor Contempt, that of course goes to no AP. And as for the melee side of things, it's got the Claws, which are only Strength 7, -2 AP and 2 damage. So that's going to be going up against infantry models. Now Strength 7 going up against infantry models is probably a bit too much, but not enough as an anti-tank weapon. Now onto the actual bad points. As just mentioned, it's got pretty poor damage output. You can't expect too much damage coming from this thing. Secondly, it's a Canoptic unit, so it's going to be hitting on a 4+ as opposed to a 3+. And then finally, the Tomb Sentinel is a slightly better option if you wanted to take one of these larger Forge World models. So that's why the Canoptic Tombstalker is in the D tier, and in fact that wraps up the D tier with only one single unit. So let's press on into the C tier, starting us off with the Canoptic Plasmacite. Now it had to go somewhere. I don't think it's the absolute worst unit because it has advantages, which we're going to go through now. There's quite a lot of positives in fact. So it's got the dimensional translocation ability to deep strike in. That will likely be with your Hexmark Destroyer. So that means behind enemy lines becomes an option if you're taking that pairing, because now you've got 2 units behind enemy lines as opposed to 1. So you're going to be maximising on that secondary if you're doing that. Now it's also got a use of actually eating Overwatch. Say for example it's with some Scorpet Destroyers. You're going up against a range heavy army such as Tau. You don't want to be throwing your Scorpet Destroyers away going into Overwatch when you're making that charge move. So you can throw away your Plasmacite, 15 points. All the Overwatch is going to go into that unit. That way your Scorpet Destroyers are going to go in unharmed. The fourth point is the Evasion Protocols ability. So simply it cannot be targeted if it's within 3 inches of a Dynasty Destroyer cult unit, unless it's the closest eligible target. That gives it a slight bit of protection I guess. Now the main ability that you're going to be using with the Canoptic Plasmacite is the Infused Madness ability. Now you can do this once per turn at the start of either the charge phase or the fight phase, it's completely up to you. You select a friendly Dynasty Destroyer cult unit within 3 inches. You roll a dice on a 1, unfortunately one of the models in that unit is destroyed. However, regardless of the result, you're going to +1 to the strength and attacks characteristics of all models within that unit. That's going to be really handy on say your Scorpet Destroyers, your Ophidian Destroyers in particular, because they're more your choppy base kind of Destroyer cult units. Now you do have the option of using the Locust Lord and the Scorpet Lord, but if you do roll a 1, you've literally just destroyed your own character, so it's not worth doing that. Next up, it's got an 8-inch movement with the Fly keyword, so it's going to be keeping up quite well with those Destroy units, not a problem. Then it's only 15 points. If you've got 15 points left over, okay, you could get a Canoptic Scarab base, but maybe it's worth considering taking this Canoptic Plasmacite, especially if you've got the right secondaries that synergize quite nicely with him. Then finally, he's not going to be taking up a slot if you've got a Destroyer unit within your actual list. Now likely you will have at least one Destroyer unit, so yeah, the likelihood is there'll be no slot taken when you're taking a Plasmacite. Now onto the bad. As already mentioned, if you do roll a 1, there's going to be a risk of removing Destroyer cult units, and they can be quite pricey, 40 points, 50 points. You don't really want to be losing Destroyer cult units. The second disadvantage is the Recall Protocol ability. If he's not within 6 inches of a Destroyer cult unit, then he simply gets destroyed. So if he makes the charge and the Destroyer cult unit doesn't, or vice versa, then there is a chance that the Plasmacite won't be within 6 inches by the time the morale phase comes along. Now don't get me wrong, you can do some piling shenanigans, or you've got the option of consolidating. Sometimes you do find that you'll be short of 6 inches and then this model will be destroyed. Then the next negative is the fact that it gives up an easy kill point. With only one single wound, especially if you're playing in a kill point kind of mission, or there's some secondaries that relate to kill points, getting rid of models, and yeah, this one could be an easy one to be handing to your opponent. Then finally, the fact that it can't perform actions, that's a slight hindrance, because you would like it to perform some sort of action if it just stood there doing virtually nothing. So that's the Canoptic Plasmacite in the C tier. Let's move on to the next unit in the C tier, which have gone with the Catan Shard of the Deceiver. Now of course the Catan Shards have all the Catan powers, which are very good, throwing out lots of mortal wounds. Now the Deceiver in particular has the Grand Illusion ability, which is pretty decent. At the start of the first battle round you can select up to 3 friendly Necron units, remove them from the battlefield, and then set them up anywhere on the battlefield wholly within your deployment zone. So you're effectively redeploying 3 units. Now if the mission uses strategic reserves, which it will be, then instead you can actually place any of those 3 units into strategic reserves without having to pay any additional command points, regardless of how many units that are actually already in strategic reserves. So that's good twofold. First of all, ever since the chapter approved Nephilim book, the CP you begin with in the start of the game is much less. You can use this as a way of getting units into strategic reserves without actually paying for it. Second of all, if you've already got 50% of your army in strategic reserves, you can actually put 3 more units into strategic reserves because it's not going to have any effect whatsoever. So a little bit of a cheat code there in terms of strategic reserves. Now it's got the dimensional translocation ability, so it's got the ability to deep strike, which is actually really nice because you want to be coming in on your own terms with a Catan Shard, because you don't want to be losing this in a single given turn, because it is quite pricey at the end of the day. A 300 point model being lost in turn 1 or even turn 2 before you've even got to use it is quite annoying. Fourth on the list is the misdirection ability. Any attacks will be at a -1 to hit. Not too bad. And then of course the Necrodermis ability, which is for all the Catan Shards really. It's got a 4+ invulnerable save, and it cannot lose more than 3 wounds in a given phase. That's really strong against factions that can only do sort of one thing. They're very one-dimensional. If there's a real shooty faction, they're not likely going to be doing much in melee or much in the psychic phase. However, there are some weaknesses to the Deceiver going up against certain factions that can do the psychic phase, the shooting phase, as well as the fight phase. So you could still be losing 3 wounds in a given phase and actually lose your Catan Shard, all 9 wounds gone in a single turn. Going up against factions such as the Tyranids, for example, are a real weakness. The final positive I wanted to mention is got an 8-inch movement with the fly keyword. Okay, so on to the negatives. You can't be sticking any relics on your Catan Shard, of course. It's got no command protocols ability whatsoever, so it doesn't matter what command protocols you've got active, they're not going to work with a Catan Shard of the Deceiver. There's going to be no dynastic codes. It would be really cool if you can put a Catan Shard in the Novak dynasty, for example, for that +1 to charge, but that's never going to happen. Now, out of the 3 named Catan Shards is probably the weakest in terms of competitive play. The Void Dragon as well as a Nightbringer just have more uses in terms of damage output. Then finally, you can only have 1 Catan Shard per detachment, and you're likely going to be choosing one of the other guys before you get to this guy. And then of course you've got the Transcendent Catan Shard as well, which is another option, and we're going to be seeing that one later in this video. So next in the C tier, we've got the Canoptic Reanimator. You guys know I absolutely hate the Canoptic Reanimator, but he's not a D tier option. I think he's a C tier. I can already sense that Dan's in the comments telling me this is an S tier model. If you're in the Discord, you know what I'm talking about. If you know, you know. But depends on how you play. If you've got Silvertide Warriors, perfect. So of course his main ability is an Nanoscale Reanimation Beam, which is an aura done in your command phase. You select 1 friendly dynasty unit within 6 inches and visible, and until your next command phase, as long as they're staying within 6 inches, you get to +1 to your reanimation protocol rolls for that unit. It's going to synergize pretty well with warriors in particular. Now don't get me wrong, you can also use it with the Scorpec Destroyers and all the other Destroyer cult units as well. It's going to work just fine with them, but reanimation protocols in general works better on 1 wound models. Now something I only thought of recently, which is the fact that he can do an action while keeping his aura ability up and running, because when you do an action, it's only the character's auras that turn off, and this model is not a character model. So therefore, if he does do an action, such as Ancient Machineries, because he's got the Canoptic keyword, his aura is still going to be up and running. The fourth point is the fact that he's got the core keyword, so potentially you could use the Veil of Darkness relic on him, things like that, anything that relates to the core keyword. Then finally, is he a distraction unit? Potentially he is. He does stick out like a sore thumb if you're not going behind obscuring terrain. If he is sticking out, your opponent is very likely going to be targeting him, but you can say that's a positive because it's a distraction. Now onto the negatives, he's got no invuln saves. I think he did deserve an invuln save, but nope, he hasn't got one of those. Now his ability only works on 1 unit, and that 1 unit must stay within 6 inches. So it is an aura, but it isn't an aura, but it is an aura. Kind of doesn't make sense for me. Further to add to that, the prioritization stratagem is too pricey. It's 2 command points just to be able to switch the target of the actual beam from 1 unit to another one. 2 command points, I just think it's not worth it. And then finally, it's just got a very poor damage output. Now I know it's not there to do damage, but you've got to mark it down for the damage output. So that in fact closes the C tier. We've gone with the Canoptic Plasma Sight, the Deceiver, and then up the top of the C tier, the the Canoptic Reanimator. So that pushes us into the B tier, starting us off with the Cryptothralls. Now Cryptothralls are really cheap, 40 points for the pair. They've got the Protector's Aura ability, so while a friendly Cryptek unit's within 3 inches, the Cryptek model can use the Lookout Sir rule even if the unit contains fewer than 3 models. So even if you've only got one single Cryptothrall model left on the battlefield, you can't target that Cryptek unless it's the closest eligible model. Lovely. So it's also got a synergy with Crypteks in general, so you can be boosting the ballista skill and weapon skill of the Cryptothralls to a 3+, and for 40 points that's not bad, especially with their range of melee weapons. Now they're not going to be taking up a battlefield role if you've got a Cryptek, and you should really have a Cryptek if you're taking these guys, that's one of the main reasons for them. But another main reason for taking them is they're a good action option. They do have the Canoptic keyword, and they are an infantry model, so they've got lots of different options in terms of secondary objectives. It could be raise the banners, it could be again ancient machineries, plenty more other secondary options from the chapter approved book. Now as for the bad, there's no invulnerable save. I don't think that's too much of a big deal, they're only 40 points for the pair, but they are quite an easy kill point for your opponent. Again, we kind of spoke about that when we were talking about the plasma site. If there are secondary objectives or mission objectives that relate to kill points, then they're a very easy target. Further of all, the bodyguard ability was nerfed quite recently, so it only switches on the Lookout Sir rule as opposed to the Cryptek not actually being eligible to be a target. So sniper rifles, for example, in the game can literally shoot straight through these guys, just like our death marks can do to enemy characters. Then finally, they're not very good at keeping up with your Cryptek models. Now, they do only move 5 inches, your Chronomancer moves 8 inches, and the Technomancer has the option of moving 10 inches with fly, so it's only really the Plasmancer and the Psychomancer that are also moving 5 inches, but they're likely going to be using some sort of Veil of Darkness relic because their abilities require them to be quite close to enemy units. So that's why I'm going to be putting them in the B tier. On to another unit in the B tier, which is the Triox Stalker. Now, ever since the new chapter approved, I think they've had a little bump up. Let's see how they get on. So they're quick with a 10-inch movement, pretty nice. They've got the Quantum Shield ability, so you're not wounding them less than a 4+, and they've got a 5+ invulnerable save, pretty good. It can shoot into combat because it's a vehicle model, and of course has that targeting relay, so if it does make a ranged attack that hits a certain unit, army wide, if you're now targeting that particular unit, you can reroll hit rolls of a 1. It's now got the core keyword because of that balanced data slate update, so all vehicles are now core. That works quite nicely, especially with the Silent King, because the Silent King doesn't require core units to have the Dynasty keyword. Furthermore, you've got choices of weapons. Whether it's the Heat Ray, which is like a flamer and a melter all in one, maybe you want to take the Particle Shredder, which is 8 shots at strength 6, or maybe you want to take the Twin Heavy Gauss Cannon, which is 6 shots at strength 7. Now I personally like the Particle Shredder. It's a free option and you're getting 8 shots, so you're pretty much definitely going to be hitting at least once to turn on that targeting relay, and the damage is 2 as well, so not bad as a damage. The only problem is it's only 24 inches as opposed to say 30 inch. Now if the range weapons weren't enough for you, of course it's got the melee option of having the Stalker Forelimbs, which are strength 7 minus 2 AP and 3 damage. Now strength 7 may not be that appealing, but there are ways within the Necron Codex to bump that to a strength 8. One of them is very simple, which is the Stratagem Disruption Fields, which is going to be a +1 to the strength. So strength 8 is that magic number. Going up against infantry, you're likely wounding them on a 2+. And then finally, as I already mentioned, there's some Silent King synergy in there. As for the bad, it can't be accepting any dynasty buffs whatsoever. Again, there's no Novak dynasty, there's no Nihilak dynasty. It's a dynastic agent model, so therefore no dynasty buffs. And that kind of sucks as well because he's core, so even though he's got the core keyword, you can't be using that Mild With Done ability on say a Catacomb Command Barge. That requires the target of the ability to have the same dynasty code as them. As for the damage, mediocre damage outlay really. Does do a little bit, just not enough for me unless you're buffing it with the Silent King. 4 point down, it's got a degrading stat line because it is a vehicle that has 12 wounds in total, so once you knock it down to 6 wounds, it's going to affect the movement, weapon skill and ballistic skill, and then again when you get down to 3 wounds. Then finally, it's only got 3 attacks in melee. I think that's absolutely criminal from Games Workshop. It should not have only 3 attacks in melee. For me, this needs doubling. But hey, it's only got 3 and that's why it's been marked down. Okay, on to the next one, which is the Hexmark Destroyer. One of the nice and shiny new models in this edition, although it has been a few years now. So first of all, it's a character model. So you can be using warlord traits, you can be using relic options if you wanted to. But furthermore, just being a character model in general keeps your command protocols up and running because you need at least a character on the battlefield in order for your command protocols to continue being active throughout the battle. I kind of mentioned this already with the Canoptic Plasma Sight, but it's a good option for behind enemy lines. It's only a single model with the Deep Strike ability, which we're going to mention in a moment. Pop him down behind enemy lines with a Plasma Sight, scoring maximum points for behind enemy lines per turn. Now what I like about the Hexmark Destroyer is he's really good against Toughness 3 infantry. His weapons are strength 6, so he's going to be wounded on 2s. I mean, in fact, he hits on 2s and he rerolls as well. because it's a destroy cult unit. And even to further boost that, the Overwatch is on the 2+ as well. Now what I quite like to do is use the Gauntlet or the Conflagrator relic, especially against your Horde units. And because it's a pistol, you can actually be shooting this alongside his actual pistols within his data sheet. Be taking away a lot of models and then forcing a morale check. And then yeah, a few more models are going to run away. And if they want to charge a Hexmark Destroyer, go ahead, Overwatch on a 2+. Then finally, the Refric Interception Stratagem, which is just an anti-deep strike option for us because it's got the Hyperspace Hunter keyword. You're not going to be using it against elite units, but if there's a Toughness 3 unit that's popped into your back lines, then yeah, get your Hexmark Destroyer to pop in with them, remove most of the unit before they can even actually start scoring points. Now as for the bad, no Inmun Save unfortunately again, and we kind of just mentioned it, is really awful against elite units, especially against power armor, because his pistols are -1 AP, and with Armor of Contempt that goes down to 0 AP, and his ability to have more shots when he removes units, it's not going to happen that often with power armor. You're not going to be removing models, potentially sisters, but yeah, without the AP, you're not going to be doing too much. Furthermore, because he's a single model without an Inmun Save, he's quite an easy target for assassination if your opponent does take assassination as a secondary objective. And then finally, he's offering nothing in melee. Once the opponent actually gets into melee after your Overwatch, if you do choose to do Overwatch, then yeah, he's pretty much a sitting duck. He's not going to be doing much else. Okay, he does have 4 attacks, but you're at strength 5, no AP, 1 damage. You can't expect too much there. Okay, next we've got another Catan shard, which is the Transcendent Catan. So very similar to the Deceiver, you've got the Catan powers for lots of mortal wound outlay. Got the Necrodermis ability, so we can't be losing more than 3 wounds in a given phase. We've already spoke about that previously. 8-inch move with fly, pretty good. Now something quite unique to the Transcendent Catan shard is his Fractured Personality ability. So before the battle, you either select from one of these 6 options, or you can randomly take 2 of them by rolling 2d6. And there is some cool and quirky options. I mean, there's the option of you can't wound him on less than a 4+. Maybe you want to give him a 3+ armor save, or the Dimensional Translocation ability. There's 6 different options there, which is quite unique to the unit as a whole. Now, if you were to actually select your option as opposed to rolling 2 dice and taking 2 of them, this makes him quite flexible. You kind of get him doing what you want him to do. If you want him as a power puncher, maybe put his strength to strength 7. If you want him as a distraction, give him the deep strike ability. There's lots of different ways of being flexible with him. Next, we've got the fact that he's got a good outlay in terms of the melee attacks. 5 attacks at strength 6, -4 AP, each one is damage d6. Again, you could pop that strength to strength 7 if you selected that Fractured Personality. But yeah, very flexible and very good melee output. Then finally, he's the cheapest Catan shard at only 230 points. As for the bad, very similar to the Deceiver, no relic options, no command protocols, no dynasty codes, only 1 Catan shard per detachment, and this Catan shard can only actually use 1 single Catan power. Now if you were to select the first option in his Fractured Personality ability, you do get to use 2 different powers from the ones that he knows. That's probably the most favoured option, to be honest with you, because you need those Catan powers throwing out mortal wounds as often as possible. So we've got a few more units in the B tier. It's quite a crowded tier group today. So next we're going to be talking about the Flayed ones. Now some of you guys may want to push the Flayed ones to A tier perhaps, but for me I'm going to be sticking them in B tier today. So first of all, onto the good. Minimum 5-man unit is cheap, only 50 points for 5 models. They've got the deep strike ability, dimensional translocation, so you can be popping them in the back lines, doing secondary objectives, engaging all fronts behind enemy lines. So they're just good for scoring in general, even for your primaries as well. They've got the option of having the 20-man blob. That's going to of course cost you 200 points, and you might have to sell your kidney to actually get 20 models because they're quite pricey if you're buying them from new. Now the Flesh Hunger ability is quite nice if you're going up against non-vehicle units. Any unmodified hit rolls of a 6 will score an additional hit. If you've got 20 of these guys, that's a lot of hits because they've got 3 attacks per model. So from the 60 attacks, you can expect an additional 10 hits there. That's providing that all 20 of them of course are in combat. Furthermore, another ability it's got is the Terrifying Foes aura. So while an enemy unit is within 3 inches of the unit, subtract 2 from the leadership characteristics of models in that unit. Now that ability pairs quite nicely with the Psychomancer's ability, which is the Nightmare Shroud. He can subtract 1 from the leaderships of models in close proximity, so when you're adding these together, yeah, your opponent is likely going to be failing morale. Now as for stratagem options, they've got some decent ones, a couple of unique ones to the Flayed ones. First one being Storm of Flensing Blades. It is 2 command points, a little bit pricey, but effectively they get to fight again in that fight phase. And the Shadows of Drazak, which is only 1 command point. If they're selected as a target of an attack, it's a -1 to hit them. Not too bad there. And then finally they're of course a core unit, so you can be buffing them with Mind Will Be Done for example, and there's lots of other synergy within the codex that are going to relate to core. Now as for the bad, there's no ranged output, so in particular if they do come in from dimensional translocation, unless they make a charge move, they're going to be sitting there for an entire turn, because yeah, there's no range output whatsoever. They're going to go down pretty quickly. They are only toughness 4 with a 4+ armor save. Now if you've got 20 of them, of course that's not too bad, especially with reanimation protocols, but don't expect them to stay up too long. Now finally, no prisoners. They're an easy target for no prisoners. You're giving away points, especially in a larger unit of them. Now the likelihood is you bring them in a unit of 5 anyway, just to do some secondaries. Okay, let's move on to the next one, which is the death marks. Now I've kind of started to like the death marks lately. I know a lot of you in the comments aren't still too keen on death marks, but I'm starting to like them. They've got a lot cheaper. They're in fact cheaper than immortals now, because immortals are 16 points a model and the death marks are 15. Now of course they're going to be ignoring the lookout sir rule, which is the main reason for taking death marks. You want to be sniping out characters as soon as you can, right from turn 1 if possible, and they're also throwing out mortal wounds when they wound on a 6, which is particularly good if you're using that Mephrit Dynasty stratagem as well, because that 6 will actually inflict 2 mortal wounds. Now they've got the dimensional translocation abilities similar to the flayed ones. They can be popping in your enemy backlines if you wanted to. Again, it could be engaged on all fronts, maybe R&D, preferably using the protocol of sudden storm so that they can actually do an action while still firing ranged attacks. That would be quite common with these guys. Now they hit on 2s naturally. Of course if they do move it will be a 3+ because it's a heavy weapon, but core can sometimes deal with that with the mild done ability. They've got their horrific interception, very similar to the hex mark, so you can pop these guys in to intercept a deep strike unit, not too bad, and also as mentioned they're pretty good for scoring. Now as for the bad, there's no invuln saves again, so they will go down. They do have reanimation protocols, but don't expect them to last too long, so I would personally keep them back, maybe in the terrain feature, in a ruin or something. They've got the range to stay back and out of trouble. Now they've got the heavy weapons, so as soon as they use the deep strike ability, it will be a -1 to hit because that is considered movement, so they will be hitting on 3s, and any movement from then on, again, a -1 to hit penalty there. Next point is they're awful in melee, very similar to the hex mark again. As soon as these guys are tied up in combat, they're not doing any damage, that you pretty much lost them at that point. And finally, for me, you need 10 of them as a minimum for damage impact against character models. If you're taking a unit of 5 of them, trying to snipe out characters isn't really the way to go for me. But if you are taking 5, then you're probably just using them for the secondary objectives, then you may as well just look at flayed ones. Okay, these guys do have a toughness 5 as opposed to a toughness 4, and a better armor save as well, but the flayed ones are a lot cheaper. So that wraps up the very congested B tier: Cryptothralls, Triarch Stalker, Hexmark Destroyer, Transcendent Catan Shard, flayed ones, and the death marks. So only 2 tiers left. There's not many units left, so the video shouldn't be that much longer now. Onto the A tier, and we're going to start this tier off with the Void Dragon. So the Void Dragon, I'll skim through some of these because we already spoke about them earlier. The Catan powers, very nice, mortal wound outlay. Also it has the range capabilities with that sphere of the Void Dragon. Now it is only 12-inch range, but it is strength 9, -4 AP, and the damage is D6. And if it is a vehicle, the damage will be D3 +3. Now it is one shot. Any units that are in between your model and the enemy model in that straight line are going to be targeted with this attack. Now it's got a nicer toughness of toughness 7. So it makes him pretty resilient, and to add to his resiliency he's got the matter absorption ability, so if he does remove a vehicle model, roll a d6, and on a 2+, the model's going to regain a lost wound to a maximum of 3 lost wounds per phase. So that's pretty good against certain factions in particular, Astra Militarum being an example there. So with that ability and the actual weapon he's got being an anti-vehicle weapon, yeah, it kind of makes him an anti-vehicle option. You're just getting the extra damage, especially with the weapons. Now he's got the Necrodermis ability, so you can't be taking more than 3 wounds a phase, and he's got that 4+ invulnerable save, nice, and the 8-inch move with Fly again. As for the bad, very similar to the previous Catan shards, no relics, no command protocols, no dynasty codes, and only 1 Catan shard per detachment. Now this next one, I wasn't sure where to put them. I've kind of put them in the middle of this tier. Previously when I started doing this video, they were actually in the B tier, and we're talking about the Lich Guard. Now, I pushed them up to the A tier because I think I was a little bit too harsh. Now let me know in the comments below if you think I was right to put them in this A tier. So let's talk about the Lich Guard anyway. So they're a core unit, so the Marvel Dun is going to be working pretty good. Guardian protocols, so they're going to be able to protect your infantry nobles and your dynastic infantry nobles within 3 inches, so they're going to have the Lookout Sir ability even if there's only one single Lich Guard. They've got 2 very different loadouts, one being the very choppy kind of loadout, which is the War Scythe. Strength 7, -4 AP and 2 damage, with options of being able to actually buff that to strength 8. Maybe it's the Disruption Field Stratagem for example, or it could be Protocol of Hungry Void just for that extra strength. Now the other option is probably more preferred within the Necron community, which is the Hyperphase Swords and Dispersion Shield option. So they're getting a 4+ invulnerable save and a 2+ armor save, and the sword is strength 6, -3 AP but only 1 damage. So not as useful going up against power armor in particular, especially with Armor of Contempt, but when they're taking the shields, they're not really there for the damage outlay. They're more likely going to be there to defend objectives, screen off character models and things like that. Then finally, there's some synergy with Overlords, particularly Anrakir the Traveller, because Anrakir the Traveller gives Necron core units within 6 inches a +1 to their attacks characteristics. So these guys already have 3 attacks base. When you've got 10 of these guys, that could be 40 attacks. Bump the strength to strength 8. That's a lot of attacks at high strength, high AP and high damage. So let's move on to the bad. They're quite slow. They're only moving 5 inches. It's likely going to be bumped to 6 inches with the Relentless March ability from a nearby character model. But it's still pretty slow. I mean, you can use the Veil of Darkness relic perhaps. But once they have been moved with that relic, they're not going to be moving that quickly. Then finally, the bodyguard rule has of course been nerfed. It previously completely ignored sniper attacks, now it doesn't. Okay, so on to the final unit within the A tier before we get onto the actual S tier. And for me, this one, again, I wasn't sure. I had this in the S tier at the start of this video. I put it in the A tier. It is the Catan Shard of the Nightbringer. Now, this is my preferred Catan Shard option out of all the Catan Shards. It's got the Catan powers, of course. Now, in particular, I like his Gaze of Death with that potential of doing 9 mortal wounds. Pretty good. His melee attacks completely ignore in-run saves, which is really handy. And he can also be taking on all types of options. He can be taking on like infantry horde units because he's got 2 complete different profiles in melee. One being the Reaping Sweep, which is going to be 12 attacks, hitting on 2s, strength 7, so it's going to be likely wounded on 2s, if not 3s. -3 AP, 1 damage a pop. That's more than enough for horde units. Or you're taking the Entropic Blow profile, which is strength 14, -4 AP and D6 damage. And again, no in-1 saves can be made. Now if you wanted to optionally, you could have no in-1 saves against the Reaping Sweep profile, which is the lower profile, but you will have to use the stratagem Entropic Strike for 2 command points. But the option is there, especially when there's some units that are quite reliant on their actual in-1 saves. So his strength as well as his toughness is stronger than all the other Catan Shards, with strength 7 as well as toughness 7. Now the main ability that I really love about the Nightbringer is his Drain Life ability. This takes away the ability to use rules that ignore wounds it loses. At first glance you're thinking of Feel No Pain saves as an example, but there's also characters within the game such as Abadan the Despoiler or Grazgol from the Orc Codex that can only take a certain amount of wounds per phase or per turn. Very similar in fact, the Nightbringer is an example, he can only take 3 wounds per phase. If the Nightbringer went up against another Nightbringer, you would completely ignore that Necrodermis ability. Now when you combine that to the fact that his main melee weapon ignores in-1 saves, you're likely not going to be leaving your opponent with an armor save whatsoever. As mentioned a second ago, he's got the Necrodermis ability, only losing 3 wounds per phase and an in-1 save, pretty good, and 8-inch movement with fly. Now as for the bad, very similar, no relics, no command protocols, no dynasty codes. Now he's the most expensive of the named 3 Catan Shards, he's 20 points more than the Deceiver as well as the Void Dragon, but I think he's actually worth that 20 points to be honest with you. Now of course, only 1 Catan Shard per detachment, and finally he's going to be targeted from turn 1, there's no doubt about it. If you've got this guy on the tabletop from turn 1, your opponent is going to be gunning for him. They know if this thing gets anywhere near their army, they're going to be in for a world of trouble. So that's the A tier all locked up, Void Dragon, Lich Guard and the Nightbringer. On to the S tier, or otherwise known as the God tier. I've gone with 2 units today. Now this one I may get some conflict with in the comments, but for me I personally love the Canoptic Spiders. I can understand why they're an A tier, maybe even a B tier with some of you guys, but I really love them, especially now that they've got the core keyword. They're going to be synergizing with all sorts of things. Mine Will Be Done, for example, Implacable Conqueror. There's also synergy with the Technomancer with the Rites of Reanimation ability, bringing one back. They're going to be synergizing with the Scarab Swarms, of course, bringing a Scarab base back every turn, pretty good. They've got a strong melee attack, strength 8, -3 AP and 2 damage, so it's a nice infantry killer there. And you've got the option of adding range attacks, which I personally would now with the Particle Beamers. Having 2 Particle Beamers is 12 shots at strength 5, okay there's no AP and there's only 1 damage, but these are monster units, they can be shooting into combat if they wanted to. You've then got the 2 added options of either the Gloom Prism or the Fabricator Claw Array, so it could be healing vehicles or being an anti-psycho model. I think this thing just does it all for me. There are a couple of things that let it down which we're going to go on to next. So it's got no in-1 save. Now it is quite a tanky model with 6 wounds at toughness 6 with a 3+ armor save, but it doesn't have an in-1 save, so the high powered weapons are going to go straight through armor unfortunately. Now a unit of 3 of these can get quite pricey, especially if you start sticking the guns on. With the ranged weapons it's 70 points a hit, and if you want 3 of them, 210 points for a unit. So if you're going to also take the Canoptic Scarab Swarms and the Technomancer, that piece of synergy can get quite pricey. Now these things are slow at 6 inches, they do have the fly keyword but they're not moving that rapidly. Maybe it goes to 7 inches because of the Relentless March aura, or maybe you're taking the Ancient Stir for an additional inch of movement. Now they're only hitting on a 4+ unfortunately, unless you're taking the Control Node with the Technomancer, which you probably will be to be honest with you. That's the better option with the Canoptic units. but naturally they're hitting on a 4+. But if they do get destroyed, they do have the explode ability, and on a 6, they're likely going to be exploded into your own friendly units. Now it is only 1 mortal wound, so it's not the worst case, but again, you've got to knock it down as a negative. Then the final unit in the S tier today is the Scorpec Destroyers. They're quick with 8-inch movement, they've got the hardwired for destruction ability, so they're rerolling 1s naturally. They've got the core keyword, so you could use the Marvel Done ability on them to hit on 2s, rerolling 1s, that's pretty good. There's a lot of damage output, especially with a unit of 6. 2 of them are going to have the Hyperphase Reap Blades, which are strength 7 minus 4 AP, 3 damage. As mentioned in some previous entries, you use the Disruption Fields stratagem to bump that to strength 8, or using the Protocol of Hungry Void, get it to strength 8 or even strength 9 if you're using both of them. Illumina's Arrows in fact could give you another one to make that strength 10. So there's a lot of opportunity to get these really high in terms of strength. 4 of the models are going to have the Hyperphase Threshers, which start off at strength 5 minus 3 AP and 2 damage, although they're going to have 4 attacks base instead of 3. Now you've got the option of the Plasma Sight, which we mentioned earlier. Maybe you're going to use the Plasma Sight to again have a little bit more strength. In fact, you can get that to strength 11 if you really wanted to, if the stars all align perfectly. Strength 11 on your Scorpec Destroyers, that's crazy, but you can use that Plasma Sight as an option to eat the Overwatch. Then finally, the Whirling Onslaught stratagem. I think this is one of the most underrated stratagems in the Necron Codex. A -1 to wound is actually massive. When you start doing the maths on how good that is, it's incredible, because these guys are already toughness 5, so what that means is even a strength 9 weapon going up against Scorpec Destroyers using this stratagem is still going to require a 4+. But you can use that in all sorts of ways. I mean, even if there's a lot of strength 4 weapons and they already need 5s to wound, you pop this stratagem, now all of a sudden it's 6s to wound, so they're not going to likely do much damage. It's a really decent stratagem, I'd highly recommend using it. Now there are a couple of little negatives that we've got to mention just for this video. No invulnerable save, okay. I mean, you do have the option of taking a Chronomancer to give them an invuln save, but naturally there's no invuln save there. And if they do get targeted, they can go down quite quickly. They're not indestructible. Once they are targeted, they will go down, but you can kind of say that about any unit, to be honest with you. That wraps up the S tier, Canoptic Spiders and the Scorpec Destroyers. So guys, here are my results in terms of the tier list. So everything is ordered how I would order it. So yeah, let me know in the comments below what you would change. What do you think I've got wrong? What do you think I've got correct? Let me know down in the comments below, or join the Discord and we can have a discussion about it. So guys, yeah, remember to like and subscribe to the channel if you're new, hit the notification bell, and as always, thank you all for watching. I'll see you next time.